Welcome. This video is documenting the prediction that famous singer-songwriter Paul Simon of Simon and Garfunkel will slip and fall and severely injure his head on December 19th, 2025. The post date on the social media platform that you are watching this video on proves that this prediction is being made ahead of time, as does this time-stamped email and forensic notes PDF document. If you are skeptical for some reason, please email me and I will forward these to you. If you have already watched this introductory information regarding November 27th, you can skip ahead no more than precisely 10 minutes. Welcome. This video that you are watching was produced prior to November 27th, 2025, when prior to this date, it was predicted that Paul Simon of Simon and Garfunkel, the famous singer and songwriter, would slip and fall and severely injure his head on this November 27th, 2025 date, Thanksgiving. This is because God's signs, his true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections, which is only being explained on this channel, overwhelmingly indicated that November 27th would be extremely important regarding this trail of signs leading to the date that Paul Simon will slip and fall and injure his head, which is now predicted to be December 19th, 2025. 22 days after November 27th. That's why the clear and relevant signs that occurred on November 27th that related to Paul Simon revealed adding 22 more days to reach December 19th. The signs we received on November 27th are explained in other videos in more detail. But for the sake of this introduction here, I will briefly describe them. But before I do, the key thing to understand here is that when Paul Simon slips and falls and injures his head on December 19th, it will prove that all of the analysis in this video for November 27th is 100% correct and true. That's the purpose of this prediction. In other words, the reason why God does this, why he lays out a trail of signs, it is in order to elaborate on the prophetic signs, because none of the prophetic signs can be properly or fully understood without their context and connections to the other prophetic signs. It is through these connections and context that God is able to tell these stories and themes. And God does this in order to relay extremely important information and knowledge that everyone needs to know. And everyone needs to know how and why God pointed in advance to November 27th, why he did so. And it is explained in these videos that talk about God pointing to November 27th. Now, the skeptic will say, oh, well, he didn't he didn't slip and fall on that day. You were wrong. No. When the prediction comes to pass on December 19th, 22 days later, it will prove all of the analysis for November 27th. And therefore, it will prove that God was indeed pointing to November 27th regarding the slip and fall and injury of his head of Paul Simon. And therefore, all of the knowledge that's contained in these stories that were told in the lead up to November 27th are extremely important. And that's why when the prediction comes to pass, the wise person will recognize that they need to watch every minute of every video on this channel, including all of the videos that predicted November 27th. It was not quote unquote wrong. It was 100% correct. And that will be proven to be true when Paul Simon slips and falls and injures his head on December 19th. Now, why the 22 days from November 27th? Well, one of the signs we received on that day was the first American Pope's first trip abroad to 2 nations. And on the plane flight, the news story was that he was gifted the historic bat used by player number 2. The Chicago White Sox player number 2 was gifted to the Pope, the first American Pope, on his first trip abroad to 2 nations. There's much more to that. He was on, for example, his way to the 1700th anniversary celebration of the Nicene Creed. And on that day, one of the 2 National Guardsmen died who was shot on 17th Street. And on, as explained in the other video. So we have the 2 and 2, number 2's bat and the 2-nation trip. The first American Pope from Chicago hints at the first black president from Chicago, and on. And the Pope and Obama are the 2 antichrists, except the first of the 2 antichrists, the Pope, is not Pope Leo, but will be Pope Francis, who will, or is predicted to become, or be, resurrected in April 2029. That's another subject. Okay, so we have, anyway, the 2 antichrists identified once again in God's signs. Now, Paul Simon was known to be an avid baseball fan. That's one reason why this is relevant. Also, his head injury is symbolic of people's heads being injured and their brains being injured from the things. You know what I'm talking about, the things. And the components in the things make their way to people's brains. And that will ultimately lead to demonic possession, and on, as explained in countless other Paul Simon videos. But the mark of the Antichrist, which is the thing, is symbolized by the number 22 in God's signs. And the Antichrists, the 2 Antichrists, will enforce the mark of the Antichrist. The reason why the mark of the Antichrist is symbolized by the number 22 is because the inverse of the mark of the Antichrist is described in the book of Ezekiel, which would have been a Tav mark, and the Tav letter in the Hebrew alphabet is the last and 22nd letter of the Hebrew alphabet. The mark of the Antichrist is described in the last and 22nd book out of 22 books in the Bible that have a total of 22 chapters. Also, the mark of the Antichrist alters a person's chromosomes, and chromosomes come in pairs, and each chromosome has 2 arms, and so 2 and 2, 22. Now, another sign we received on this date was the death of Fuzzy Zoeller, the famous Hall of Famer golfer, professional golfer, Fuzzy Zoeller, who was known for making, and never lived it down for the rest of his life, his racist comment after he had finished the Masters and while Tiger Woods was still playing the Masters on his way to winning his first Masters tournament. The first black player to win the Masters. Again, hints at the first black president, Antichrist. Also, Tiger Woods is the GOAT, greatest of all time, and that hints at the GOAT Antichrist. Now, Fuzzy Zoeller was one of 2 players in the modern era to win the Masters in their first year as a professional. The other player was Tiger Woods. And Tiger Woods is known for his big comeback when he won the Masters 22 years after he first won the Masters in his first year as a professional. And so that's why the death of Fuzzy Zoeller also reveals adding 22 days. Now, there's so much more that's so amazing regarding all of this that is, for one thing, explained in the must-watch, as if all of them are must-watch, as you should know. 2 National Guardsmen shot, 2-nation trip by the Pope video regarding Paul Simon. Okay, so I'll leave it at that. That's the introduction here. Again, like I said, God was pointing to November 27th ahead of time. So the rest of this video will talk about how and why God pointed to November 27th ahead of time. And all of the analysis is 100% correct when the prediction comes to pass 22 days later on December 19th. And so Don't be confused when in this video later on I talk about how Paul Simon is predicted to slip and fall on November 27th. God was saying that. That's what God was saying. It was not, quote unquote, wrong, quote unquote. It was 100% correct. Okay, God was saying that Paul Simon would slip and fall on November 27th. But the way it works, and this is how it works, and I know far better than you or anyone how it works, is that it's not necessarily possible to know ahead of time, ahead of the date that God is pointing to, whether or not it will be the end of the trail of signs for that prediction or another step in the trail. And so November 27th was pointed to, and it was for Paul Simon's trail, and it ended up being a step. Now, December 19th might be a step. But at this time, we're going to go with the prediction that Paul Simon will slip and fall and injure his head on December 19th. If it doesn't happen, you can rest assured there will be clear and relevant signs related to it on December 19th. And that said, enjoy the rest of the video. It must be watched. It's extremely important information, all of these videos. As a result of the plane crashes in New York City on 9/11, 7x7x7 FDNY firefighters died. The second plane had 7 plus 7x7 passengers, which, by the way, is this 3 sets of 7 that I mentioned in the last paragraph. Because more accurately, more precisely, the symbolic 3 sets of 7 that the Israelites enacted was a 7 plus a 7x7. Because they marched around once per day for 7 days, the walls of Jericho, before they collapsed in God's judgment. And then on the 7th day, they marched around 7 times while blowing 7 trumpets. Okay. It was Joshua who led the Israelites in their symbolic 3 sets of 7 around the walls of security of Jericho before they collapsed in God's judgment. The Bible records that Joshua died at the age of 110. Simon opened the first broadcast of Saturday Night Live after the 110-story towers collapsed. Simon's 7th solo album is named after the king of rock's mansion. After lowering his asking price to $11.9 million, which since at 9/11, Simon sold his mansion near New York City exactly 37 months before the sale of the mansion in Los Angeles that was made for the TV show producer who produced the longest running TV drama in history, Seventh Heaven. Okay, I'll just recap that. God uses records, first of all, for signs. Paul Simon's record-selling best solo album was his 7th album. It was named after a mansion. He sold his New York City mansion exactly 37 months, which is 3 sets of 7, before the famous sale of the mansion owned by the famous storied mansion. That's the term the media used as well. That was built for the record-setting, most prolific TV show producer who also produced the longest-running TV drama in history, Seventh Heaven. Now, the mansion sold for $110 million. It was a storied mansion. The news headlines were something to the effect of sale of storied mansion. Okay? So the storied mansion sold for $110 million, and that's because of the 110 stories that collapsed on 9/11. Now, in which the 7x7x7 firefighters died, and there was 7 plus 7x7 passengers. All right. Now, on Simon's 7th album, that is named after a mansion, Graceland, is a hit song, Boy in the Bubble, that was inspired by the TV movie produced by Aaron Spelling, the owner of the mansion, the record-setting TV producer. His TV movie was The Boy in the Plastic Bubble. So that's another confirmation, connection, tie, parallel between Paul Simon and this TV producer. Because not only is it 7th Heaven, 7th album, Okay, and also Paul Simon's new album is 7 Psalms, which might as well be titled Seventh Heaven in a way. So, but also on the album, the 7th album, is the song Boy in the Bubble, which was inspired by the TV movie produced by Spelling, The Boy in the Plastic Bubble, which incidentally starred John Travolta, which is another person God has used in his prophetic signs, which also confirms the fact that this is a relevant connection here. Now, the planes that struck the 110-story towers on 9/11 were destined for Los Angeles, where Aaron Spelling's mansion sold for $110 million on the date August 1st, 2025, which, by the way, was a date that was recognized ahead of time. That would be important for Paul Simon, which is why this sign of the mansion sale was recognized, because God was pointing to this date ahead of time, and we know this theme of mansions regarding Paul Simon. The reason why fundamentally the date 8:1 was recognized because it hints at Revelation 8:1, which describes a period of a sound of silence being observed in heaven, when Paul Simon's first hit is Sound of Silence. Now, the mansion sold exactly 119 days, which hints at 9/11, before the predicted news of Simon's collapse and strike of his head. The planes that were destined for Los Angeles struck the 110-story towers 17 minutes apart. The $110 million mansion sold exactly 17 weeks before the predicted news of Simon's collapse and strike of his head. Now, by the way, the 17 minutes between the two planes that struck the two towers is because the two space shuttle disasters were almost exactly 17 years apart. Now, did they strike anything? No, I think they just exploded. But anyway, yeah, they are commemorated on the same day because they were almost exactly 17 years apart. And the reason for that, in turn, is Apollo 17, the last time that an American was on the moon, which in itself is symbolism for America's departure from Christ, because the moon symbolizes Christ. It is a giant rock, and in the Bible, rock is symbolism for Jesus. Also, the sun symbolizes God the Father, and the sun's light is too bright for us to gaze at, but we can gaze at the sun's light reflected off of the moon, which is also why watching for the timing of the moon in the Bible is important, as it is symbolic of watching for the timing of the Lord's return, which includes moon signs. There is a moon. Maybe it's a sunset. Never mind. Never mind. Okay, so 4 days after the planes struck the towers and the fourth plane crashed and killed 44 people on 9/11, Simon performed on the first broadcast of Saturday Night Live after 9/11. The fourth song from Simon's 7th album, that was named after the King's Mansion, the album in the 4x4th state, is Boy in the Bubble, and it was inspired by the TV movie produced by the producer of Seventh Heaven. The cover art for Simon's 7 Psalms album uses Thomas Moran's 2 owls. On the same day of the sale of the mansion that was made for the producer of Seventh Heaven, 4 people were killed in a mass shooting in a bar named the Owl Bar in the 41st state. Simon was born in the year 41. And there's a reason, because the word key is equal to 41 in Simple English Gematria, and it is a key that opens the door in the prophecy in the book of Revelation, which allows the demons to cross over into the earthly realm. And they crossed, and the 4th letter of the Hebrew alphabet is a symbol for a door, which is another reason for these 4s here, including the 4th song from the album and Simon's performance 4 days after 9/11 when 44 people died in the 4th plane that crashed. And it's also, again, because of Simon's 4th Garfunkel album, Bookends, which contains the song of America, and Paul Simon's 4th solo album, Sliding Away, because America's opportunity to repent after 9/11 has slidden away, and Paul Simon's death will symbolize the bookend completion of that opportunity. And now the idiom for 3 transgressions and for 4 repeated in the Bible, which means that the tolerable limit of transgressions has been exceeded and now judgment is unavoidable. And that's why Paul Simon's first album with Garfunkel was Wednesday morning, 3 a.m., because Wednesday is the 4th day of the week, and 3 a.m. is the beginning of the 4th watch in ancient Israel, for 3 transgressions and for 4, a Hebrew idiom. That means that destruction is now unavoidable, which is why Paul Simon's death will symbolize this. Okay, now back to what I was saying. 7 days after the sale of the mansion owned by the producer of Seventh Heaven and the day of the mass shooting in which 4 people were killed, the manhunt for the shooter who killed the 4 people ended. Okay, so 7 days after the sale of the mansion owned by the producer of Seventh Heaven. Now, this 7 days later was 8/8, August 8th. And also on 8/8, this date, the 19-year-old, 19 is the 8th prime number, and 8 is equal to 4 plus 4. This 19-year-old, as an 18th prime number years old, on the date 8/8, slipped and fell off the roof of his NASCAR car, which was number 88. And he fell in front of the press cameras when he was celebrating in Victory Lane. It was notable that the winner of the race was only 19 years old, which gives us the other 8 there. The name Jesus in Greek is equal to 888 in Greek gematria, as in Victory Lane. Our victory is through Jesus. The 8th prime number of years old driver fell off of his number 88 car on the date 8/8, exactly 8 plus 8 weeks, before it is predicted that Paul Simon will slip and fall and injure his head. That's why the driver slipped and fell off of car number 88 on the date 8/8, because it's 8 plus 8 weeks exactly before the prediction of Paul Simon's fall. But there's more, because 8 plus 8 weeks is also 4 times 4 weeks, and Paul Simon's hit song, Slip, Slide, and Away, is from his, Slip, Slide, and Away, is from his 4th solo album that was released in 77. 7 days, like I mentioned earlier, 7th Heaven, 7 Psalms. On the same day, when the driver slipped off his car, number 88, on the date 8/8, it was reported that a water slide on a Royal Caribbean cruise ship, as in the King of Rock, busted, and his mansion, busted when a man was sliding on it, which hints at Slip, Slide, and Away. That was released in 77. And this water slide on the busted ship, this water slide on the ship busted 7 days after the sale of the mansion owned by the producer of Seventh Heaven. Why all of this? Revelation 8:8 speaks of the destruction of ships. And this follows the sound of silence in heaven that is described in Revelation 8:1. Simon's first hit that launched his career was Sound of Silence, and Spelling's mansion sold on the date 8/1, exactly 37 months after the sale of Paul Simon's mansion. But let me just add this, because I explained it in the last video, the last paragraph, but I guess I have to explain it again. There are those that claim that America isn't mentioned in Bible prophecy, but they couldn't be more wrong. The destruction of ships in Revelation 8:8 is symbolic of America. And this is demonstrated to be true, for example, through Paul Simon, who is symbolism for America. Paul Simon has a hit song, America, and also a hit song, American Tune, and he sang right after 9/11, which was a warning for America to repent and turn back to God. Paul Simon is the American singer prophetically for God's signs. He's also considered to be the GOAT, greatest of all time, of American pop music composition, for example, too. Now, the destruction of ships in Revelation 8:8 follows the Sound of Silence, which is Paul Simon in Revelation 8:1. And now we're connecting 8 plus 8 weeks to the ship sign on the date 8/8, and the slip sliding off of the car number 88 by the 8th prime number years old driver. Now, the reason why the ships in Revelation 8:8 and their destruction is symbolic of the destruction of America is because a lot of Revelation and prophecy in the book of Revelation is a parallel with prophecy in the Old Testament, including in Isaiah chapter 23, which speaks of the ships of Tarshish and the daughter of Tarshish, and also judgment on ancient Tyre. Now, ancient Tyre is symbolic of America, because ancient Tyre's success and prosperity were a result of its natural protection by the ocean. It was an island off the coast in the Mediterranean, and it wasn't conquered until Alexander the Great built a causeway, a bridge, as in Paul Simon Bridge over troubled water, to Tyre and then conquered it. Likewise, Great Britain was separated from the rest of America to become a special culture for God's purposes, which birthed America, which was also protected by an ocean, or two oceans, as we know, which is a big reason for America's security and prosperity. Likewise with ancient or Great Britain. Now, Great Britain, we know from ancient evidence we know from evidence from ancient history that Tarshish was Great Britain, or is Great Britain. And the daughter of Tarshish would be America, because America was birthed by the culture of Great Britain. And so the ships of Tarshish in Isaiah chapter 23 and the ships of the daughter of Tarshish are reference to America and Great Britain, and this is how Great Britain became the dominant empire in the 19th century on which the sun never set, because of its naval power and its trading power through its ships. This is the thing about Great Britain that made it the success that it was. Likewise with America. Its naval power, which allows it to extend its power around the world anywhere through its aircraft carriers, etc. And of course, its immense trading power through its ships, its merchant navy, etc. So that's why Paul Simon, who symbolizes America and its connection to ships here, through its sliding away. It's absolutely amazing. Coincidentally, as I just said that, this segment of this video is now, it was just a second ago, exactly 8 + 8 minutes, pretty much. This is merely scratching the surface of the reasons for how this prediction is known in advance. For more information, please visit odyssey.com, spelled ODYSEE.com, or rumble.com video channels titled Asteroid Prediction. And also read the website trumpprediction.com.